So, another edition of Touchdown Music, Episode 9. I'm continuing my series of music and albums from the 1960s. These are albums I purchased when they were first released in the 1960s, and which have been musical touchstones for me ever since. The goal is to introduce these wonderful albums to people who haven't heard them before, and to reintroduce them to those who have, but who perhaps haven't listened to them for a while. Now today, we feature the seminal 1966 British blues album by John Mayall and the Bluesbreakers with Eric Clapton, the Beano album. And there's the cover with Eric Clapton, second from left, reading a copy of the Beano, which is, by the way, a English children's comic book. So at this time, the band consisted of John Mayall, he was the leader, keyboards, harmonica, and vocals. Eric Clapton, lead guitar and vocals. John McVie on electric bass, and Huey Flint on drums. Now, we'll speak more about Mayall and Clapton in a minute. Huey Flint was a long-term alumni of the British blues explosion of the 50s and 60s. John McVie actually went on to play bass with the band Fleetwood Mac. They started out as a blues band, so he went from Mayall's band, the Bluesbreakers, and along with some other alumni from Mayall's Bluesbreakers at that time, formed Fleetwood Mac, and we'll talk a bit more about them in a moment. Let's talk about John Mayall. He began gigging in the mid-1950s amid a burgeoning British blues scene. By 1963, Mayall was playing in London clubs with his own band, the Bluesbreakers. In April of 1965, a former Yardbirds guitarist, Eric Clapton, left the Yardbirds and joined the band. Now, Clapton, who was nicknamed Slowhand by his Yardbirds fans, had left his previous band as they turned into a more pop-oriented direction. He wanted to pursue a more blues purist direction. The photo shows Clapton with his bandmates in the Yardbirds. He's second from left. I believe he's about 19 here. And that would be just before he left to join Mayall. Once he joined Mayall, he was kind of with Mayall. He left and then came back. At that point, Mayall said, okay, let's capture this band on an album. So Mayall first intended to record the new band live in a London club, the Flamenco, I believe, and issue a live album. But when recordings proved of poor quality, he opted instead for a studio release. It was recorded in May of 1966, released 22nd July of 1966. The studio was Decca in West Hampstead, district of London. And the producer was Mike Vernon. Now, Vernon went on to produce the original version of the band Fleetwood Mac that I spoke of previously, which started out, as I said, as a blues band, and which famously featured another blues guitar legend, Peter Green. Peter Green followed Eric Clapton in the Bluesbreakers, and after that left with some other, as I said, alumni from the Bluesbreakers, and formed Fleetwood Mac, which originally later became sort of a pop band and very successful, but it was originally a very successful blues band. Now, on the recording that we're speaking of today, horns were later added in post-production, tenor sax, baritone, and trumpet, and they did a very good job of like, they didn't overdo the horns. They fit very well with the overall tone of the album. Of the 12 tracks on the vinyl recording, 4 were written by Mayall. One was a Mayall-Clapton co-writing, and the rest were band covers of blues standards by such artists as Freddie King, Robert Johnson, Otis Rush, and Ray Charles. In the charts, the British charts, the UK album chart, they peaked at number 6 in 1966, which is a very creditable outing. Now, let's talk a bit about the album cover, which is basically just a photo of the band. According to legend, Clapton was displeased with the photo shoot and expressed his displeasure by reading a copy of the aforementioned comic book, The Beano, while being photographed with the band. The band was photographed by David Wedgbury. So my impressions at the time, well, I came late to the party. I first purchased the vinyl recording sometime in 1969. I'd worked my way back from Eric Clapton in his subsequent band Cream to his previous band, the Bluesbreakers, because I kind of wanted to hear what he sounded like before I discovered him in the psychedelic blues band Cream. After that, I became interested in John Mayall's work and began collecting Bluesbreaker and Mayall albums also. Mayall's work were also a springboard for me to the three famous kings of electric blues guitar, B.B., Freddie, and Albert King. If you want to hear a bit more about the band Cream, I've already reviewed one of their albums, Disraeli Gears, in a previous review. So let's talk about the vinyl recording for Bluesbreakers with Eric Clapton. All Your Love, which is an Otis Rush song, starts us out, and it's a wonderful way to start. They do a wonderful cover version of this wonderful Otis Rush song. I'll play you a little clip from that in a moment. Hideaway was an instrumental by Freddie King and Suddy Thompson. Now, interestingly enough, in those days, very often, the band, minus the vocalist, would come out on stage and would warm up with an instrumental. Many of them by Freddie King, by the way. And then the vocalist would come out and the band would be sort of off and running. Little Girl by John Mayall is the third cut, and the fourth cut is another John Mayall penned song, Another Man. Number 5 is Double Crossing Time, and this is a co-written song by John Mayall and Eric Clapton. And finally, Ray Charles's classic, What'd I Say? And they do a fine job on that. So let's hear just a quick clip from All Your Love. This will just be the start, the way the song starts. You can already hear that wonderful tone that Clapton's getting on his Les Paul, and they're just revving up. It's a fantastic way to start, and it's a great song. Side 2 starts out with Key to Love, which is another John Mayall written song, followed by Parchman Farm by Mose Allison. Now, song 3, Have You Heard by John Mayall. This is a slow blues, kind of a ballad. And when I bought the album, most critics were saying this was the premier cut on the album. This was the one to listen to where you really had a full expression of Clapton's tone and playing style on this album. Ramblin' on My Mind by Robert Johnson is the first time, as far as I know, where Clapton takes the lead on vocals on a record. Steppin' Out is another instrumental, this time by Elsie Fraser, a.k.a. Memphis Slim. Everybody has pseudonyms in this business. And Steppin' Out is interesting because it became a staple for Clapton, and he carried it over into his next band, Cream, and they also played it many, many times. And finally, It Ain't Right by Walter Jacobs, a.k.a. Little Walter. Now let's hear a little bit from Have You Heard, and you'll hear that wonderful guitar tone that Clapton got. And then, as a bonus, I'll play you a live cut from this band, recorded in the Flamenco Club as far as I know. This was one of the few live recordings from that attempt to make a live album that actually came out well. And so you'll get a feel for what the band sounds like, and we'll talk a bit more about that. So first, Have You Heard by John Mayall, and then Stormy Monday, live from the Flamenco Club by the same band. Okay, so Clapton really cutting up there. And now live, Stormy Monday. Wonderful piano accompaniment, by the way, by John Mayall. Now, this wasn't obviously on the album. This was on a subsequent album called Looking Back by John Mayall, where he added this, but this actually was one of those original, probably one of the few that actually came out well enough that they could have made a full record of it had they had all the recordings, live recordings of that quality. I love this for another reason, too. Back in those days, back in the 60s, very often music clubs, were in basements of buildings for whatever reason, and maybe sound, maybe to keep the sound down or trying to not bother the neighbors. And very often you would be descending the stairs to the club, the band would already be playing inside. And as you got down and descended into the club, you could hear the band get louder and louder. And that's the way this starts out. It starts out as if you're descending those stairs. It really takes me back to those days, to the 60s, and how exciting it was to go into those clubs and hear live music like this. So this album is a seminal recording for the blues rock genre of popular music. Clapton's pairing of a Gibson electric guitar, a Les Paul guitar, and a Marshall amplifier played at full volume set the tone, pun intended, for other players. Guitarists have been chasing that sound and tone ever since. And speaking of that Les Paul, the original Les Paul guitar was stolen from Clapton, I think sometime in his Cream days, in the band Cream, and is still officially listed among the missing famous musical instruments. Now, rumors place it in a private collection in North America, I believe. Now, that doesn't mean that person stole it, obviously. Who knows how many hands it's gone through. Who knows what the original circumstances were of how the guitar came to be missing from the bandstand, so to speak. But in any case, supposedly it does exist somewhere. And if it ever came on the open market, I think it would get an enormous, bring an enormous price. So Bluesbreakers with Eric Clapton provided a template for blues rock electric guitar tone for decades to come. Yeah, its influence persists to this day. This album has been one of my touchstones since I purchased it in the 1960s, and I hope it will also be for other people. So that's all for this edition. As always, until next time, be well, and thanks for joining me.
Mm-hmm.